At exactly 3:24 p.m. Eastern Time, the Airbus A320 lifted gently from the runway at LaGuardia Airport, its nose pointing toward the winter sky over New York City. And to the passengers inside, it felt like any other ordinary flight. Seatbelts clicking, engines humming, minds already drifting toward destinations, reunions, deadlines, and dinners waiting at the other end. But what none of them could possibly know was that within less than 2 minutes, this aircraft would become a powerless glider suspended above one of the most densely populated cities on Earth. And the choices made in the next 90 seconds would separate routine aviation from one of the most studied survival events in modern history. Because aviation disasters rarely announce themselves with explosions or alarms at first. They arrive quietly, disguised as normality. And that is exactly how this story begins. Calm skies, experienced crew, a fully functional aircraft, and a city stretching endlessly below. Then, without warning, a dark mass rises into the flight path, a flock of Canada geese moving with instinct but no awareness of aluminum, jet engines, or human lives. And in a fraction of a second, multiple birds slam into both engines with a violence that is almost impossible to comprehend. Feathers and debris shredding through turbines designed to spin at thousands of revolutions per minute. The engines coughing, surging, then falling silent. Not one, but both, leaving the aircraft with zero thrust at just 2,800 feet above ground. A scenario so rare that most pilots will never encounter it in an entire career. And inside the cockpit, Captain Chesley Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles immediately understand the gravity of what has just happened. Because modern airliners are designed with redundancy for almost everything except the sky itself. And altitude is time. Time to think, time to troubleshoot, time to decide. But here, time is brutally limited. The aircraft is slowing, gravity is winning, and every second that passes steals another chance away. And this is the first psychological pivot point of the story, because what separates catastrophe from survival is not panic or heroics, but cognition under pressure, the ability to process information faster than fear. While the passengers behind the cockpit door feel only an unnatural quiet as the engines fall away, replaced by a sound no one expects after takeoff, the sound of air rushing past the fuselage. And in that moment, the human brain struggles to catch up with reality, because people expect danger to feel loud, violent, obvious, but real danger often feels silence, and that silence is the first signal that something is deeply wrong. While in the cockpit, alarms begin to chime and checklists demand attention, but checklists are written for altitude, for margins, for time that no longer exists, and the crew quickly realizes that returning to LaGuardia is mathematically impossible. Reaching Teterboro is equally out of reach, and the city below offers nothing but concrete, glass, bridges, traffic, and millions of lives that must not become part of this equation. And here is where this incident transforms from an aviation emergency into a moral one, because any uncontrolled descent into Manhattan would almost certainly mean mass casualties far beyond the aircraft itself. And so the decision forming in Captain Sullenberger's mind is not about saving the plane. It is about choosing the only surface large enough, flat enough, and empty enough to give everyone a chance: the Hudson River. A freezing, moving, unforgiving body of water that has never been part of a commercial jet's landing plan. And this is where the story hooks deeper, because ditching an aircraft on water is something pilots train for in theory, but almost never in reality, especially not at low altitude, low speed, and in winter conditions. And yet the human mind, under extreme stress, often narrows to the simplest viable option, not the safest, not the perfect one, but the only one that still exists. and as the aircraft turns gently toward the river, the passengers are still largely unaware of the magnitude of what is happening. Some praying, some confused, some simply trusting the invisible expertise at the front of the aircraft, while the skyline grows larger and the water surface rushes closer. And what makes this moment extraordinary is not just the skill involved, but the absence of hesitation, because hesitation kills in aviation, and the aircraft descends with controlled precision, wings level, nose slightly raised, speed carefully managed, and when the A320 finally meets the surface of the Hudson River, it does so with a violence softened by technique, skimming, slowing, staying intact, refusing to break apart, defying the statistical expectations that this should not work. And suddenly, the impossible has happened. The aircraft is floating, damaged but whole, alive but vulnerable, surrounded by icy water and stunned silence. And this is where most disaster stories would end, but this one is only halfway finished, because survival does not end when motion stops. It continues in evacuation, coordination, leadership, and seconds matter just as much now as they did in the air. And this is where we pause, because the miracle everyone remembers did not end with the landing. It depended on what happened next. Decisions made in freezing water, on wings turned into lifeboats, by flight attendants, passengers, and rescue crews converging from every direction. And in the next part of this story, we will move inside those moments, inside the psychology of survival after impact, and then shift forward in time to a modern incident from 2026 when a British Airways aircraft lost a landing gear wheel just seconds after takeoff, a quiet failure that could have turned catastrophic hours later over the Atlantic, because aviation doesn't need explosions to be dangerous. Sometimes all it takes is a single missing component, unnoticed until the moment it matters most, and that is where Crashing Point continues. The moment the aircraft finally comes to rest on the surface of the Hudson River, there is no applause and no immediate celebration, because the human brain does not instantly register survival. It registers uncertainty, cold, confusion, and the terrifying question of what happens next. And for the passengers inside US Airways Flight 1549, the danger is not over, it has simply changed form. Because an aircraft floating on icy water is not a stable refuge, it is a temporary negotiation with physics, and water does not forgive hesitation. And inside the cabin, flight attendants begin shouting commands with a clarity that cuts through shock, instructing passengers to move, to leave everything behind, to step carefully. Because leadership in emergencies is not about comfort, it is about control. And the difference between order and chaos in these moments determines whether survival statistics remain numbers or turn into names. And outside the aircraft, the Hudson River is moving faster than it looks, cold enough to incapacitate a human body within minutes. Yet the wings of the A320 become makeshift lifeboats, narrow, unstable, exposed to wind, but still elevated above the waterline. And passengers climb onto them, not knowing how long the aircraft will remain afloat. While inside the cockpit, Captain Sullenberger performs a task rarely discussed in heroic retellings, a methodical final sweep of the cabin to ensure no one is left behind. Because aviation professionalism does not end when the aircraft stops moving, it ends when responsibility does. And this detail matters because it reflects a mindset ingrained over decades, one that prioritizes process even when adrenaline screams for escape. And outside, something remarkable is already unfolding, because New York City, often portrayed as indifferent and distant, responds instantly. Ferry captains alter course without orders, tugboats accelerate, emergency responders mobilize with instinctive urgency, and within minutes, the river fills with vessels converging on a single point, a choreography of civilian and professional rescue that transforms potential tragedy into collective action. And this is where the narrative shifts from cockpit heroism to systemic resilience, because aviation safety is not the product of one person, but of layers, training,
design, procedures, and human cooperation intersecting at exactly the right moment. And as passengers are pulled from wings and rafts, wrapped in blankets, helped onto boats, the scale of what nearly happened becomes clearer. Because had the aircraft descended just seconds earlier or later, had the angle been slightly off, had panic disrupted evacuation, the outcome would have been drastically different. And this is where the term miracle enters public vocabulary, but professionals hesitate to use it because miracles imply randomness, and aviation survival is rarely random. It is engineered, practiced, drilled, and refined through decades of learning from past failures. And yet, despite this, Flight 1549 exposes a truth that makes the aviation world uncomfortable, that not every scenario can be simulated, that not every checklist applies, and that sometimes human judgment must override procedure. And this is precisely why the incident becomes one of the most studied events in aviation history, dissecting